Have you ever owned something that perfectly meets your needs, does everything you need it to do, and yet something about it just doesn't sit right? It's a curious dilemma, a tool that checks all the right boxes and yet leaves you feeling indifferent when you use it. I have a strange relationship with camera gear in that most of my favorite pieces of equipment are far from perfect, but I absolutely love them. And then on the other hand, I have items that are nearly perfect in every way, but I don't feel a fraction of the fondness towards them. This is the story of me and my FX3, a camera that's been around the world with me, capturing some of my favorite clips ever. But I've never really enjoyed using it. Maybe this is just the natural endpoint of a decade-long search for that one perfect camera. Or maybe I'm the problem.
I've owned this camera for around 3 years now, and it's incredible. It is absolutely still worth buying, but I've never enjoyed it. I've never liked the process of shooting with this camera, and sometimes it's an issue of the menu layout, sometimes it's the issue with the buttons, but I thought we could sit together, dive into the things that are incredible about this camera, and the things that, boy, I wish were different. Starting out with the pros of this camera is quite easy because I could essentially read off the spec sheet to you. Everything from the codecs to the frame rates to the resolution. It is everything I need from a camera. And I don't just mean from a camera that fits in a small backpack. I mean everything that I need to make the kind of videos I make.
I'm switching to Sony.
I was moving from a fully Canon system with the C70 and the R5. And those cameras are both really easy to grade and just get pleasing images out of. And I was worried that when I switched over to the FX3 that I was gonna have to be dealing with that dreaded Sony color science. Now that I've been using it for a very long time and I've shot in a lot of different environments, the colors don't bother me at all. I find I can push and pull the image as much as I need it to, really. On the FX3, you're gonna be able to get fantastic colors. I also love that this camera has functionally a dual ISO. So you have the option of 640 ISO and 12,800 ISO. If I suddenly want to switch into the 120 frames or the 1080 240 frames, I can really quickly compensate for the light that I lose by cranking the shutter speed with that secondary ISO function. The next thing that I really do love about this camera is the options it gives you for stabilization. My use cases might be different than yours because I shoot a lot of wide angle stuff, but I don't ever have to have an IBIS that's so strong that you get those really wobbly corners. I hated that on my R5. What's another thing I like about it? Dual ISO is good, IBIS is good, codecs and frame rates are good, but I never really find myself needing more out of the capabilities of this camera. So what's the problem? Like why don't I pick this thing up and feel like, yeah, this is everything I wanted a camera to be, given that it's everything I wanted a camera to be? The FX3 feels more like a brick. It's very angular. It doesn't help that I have a cage on it, obviously, but there's no real way for it to feel like I want it to feel. And if this camera weren't $5,000-ish, that might not bother me as much. But for what feels like quite a premium price point, some of these dials and buttons and the grip just do not feel nearly as good as I think they should. It's kind of all over the place in regards to buttons. It has your autofocus joystick, but instead of being on the rear where you're used to, it's up on the top. You actually end up using this camera a lot with your thumb. I just don't love it. I had an R5, an R6, and all of those cameras feel really good. The way it feels round and fit for your hands is just on a completely other level than the FX3. I truly despise Sony's lens release button. I love being able to kind of grab the lens with my finger hitting here and rotating it, taking it off, putting it on, that kind of thing. The menus have improved and they added these like cinema pages, which I do quite like. But for me, that feels like just a well-designed quick menu that I never would have gotten around to customizing, so I'm glad that's in here. But if I need to change any of the more nitty-gritty stuff, I just can never find it, ever. But ever. Okay, so menus are obviously bad. Like a Canon 60D felt like it had better buttons and dials. I don't hate everything about this physical body. I like the size. I love that I don't have an EVF hump that I really am not using for my shooting. I love that I get a full-size HDMI. Canon, please stop using micro HDMI. No one wants it. I love that the mic and headphone jacks have different colors, so you're less likely to accidentally plug your microphone into your headphones. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done that. And I love that I can run the power and charge the battery internally off of the USB-C port. And this camera is not just no slouch in low light, but that like 12,800 and even a few steps above that are so much better than any camera I've ever owned. But there's a caveat. It certainly looks worse at 10,000 ISO than my R5 or R6 did. So you just have to keep in mind that. I'll typically go between 640 and 3200. And at about that point, that's when I'm just gonna jump up to 12,800 and either use ND or stop down my f-stop. It works like a cinema camera in the body of a mirrorless camera. And that's really great. For as many of the things as there are that frustrate me about this camera or that I think Sony could and even should improve on, none of them are enough to actually stop me from using the camera. So is the FX3 worth buying in 2024? Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I don't know what your budget or needs look like, but for me, if I was in the market right now for a new camera, I think this is still what I would go for.